The leather seat felt cold against Clara Morrison's trembling hands as she stared through the car window at the imposing brick building before her. At 62, she had taught thousands of children to read, spent 4 decades shaping young minds, and raised a son who once told her she was his hero. But right now, sitting in the back seat of Marcus's Honda Accord like a child being driven to punishment, she felt smaller than she ever had in her entire life. "Wait!" Clara's voice cracked as she read the elegant gold lettering on the building's facade. "This isn't Dr. Peterson's office. Marcus, where are we?" Her son's reflection appeared in the rearview mirror for just a moment before he looked away. And at 38, Marcus had inherited his father's strong jawline, but none of Robert's warmth. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he exchanged a loaded glance with his wife Vanessa, who sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. "Mom, just trust us," Marcus said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone she'd been hearing more frequently. "This is what's best for everyone." Clara's heart began to race as the full reality crashed over her like ice water. The morning had started normally enough. Vanessa had cheerfully announced over breakfast that they'd scheduled Clara's 6-month checkup with her doctor. "We'll drive you, Clara. No need to worry about anything." The twins, Emma and Sophie, had hugged their grandmother goodbye before school, their 7-year-old faces bright with innocent love. But now, staring at the brass plaque that read, "Sunset Manor Assisted Living, where family comes first," Clara understood with horrible clarity that there was no doctor's appointment. There never had been. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the car's humming engine. Vanessa finally turned around, her expression a carefully composed mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Clara, we've talked about this. You're forgetting things more often. Yesterday you couldn't find your reading glasses." "They were on my head," Clara said desperately. "Everyone does that." "And last week you left the stove on," Marcus added, still not meeting her eyes in the mirror. What if something happened to the girls? Clara's mind reeled. She remembered the stove incident differently. She'd been making soup for Emma, who had a cold, and Vanessa had rushed into the kitchen complaining about work stress, effectively taking over and dismissing Clara from her own cooking. But when Clara tried to speak, the words felt trapped in her throat. Through the window, she watched other families walking elderly relatives through the facility's front doors. Some of the seniors looked confused, others resigned. A few appeared genuinely happy, but Clara noticed that many of them clutched small suitcases with the desperate grip of people who knew they weren't coming home again. "I gave you everything," Clara said, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside her teacher's core. "I sold the house your father and I built together. I used our retirement savings to help with your mortgage. I moved 800 miles away from everyone I knew because you said you needed me." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder than what? Harder than lying to me? Harder than treating me like I'm already gone?" Clara's voice rose slightly, and she saw Vanessa's shoulders tense. The car fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Clara stared at the back of her son's head, remembering the little boy who used to run to her classroom after school, proudly showing her his artwork and begging her to read him just one more story. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. That little boy was gone now, replaced by a man who could look at his mother in a rearview mirror and lie without flinching. 3 years earlier, Clara Morrison had believed she was embarking on the most beautiful chapter of her life. After Robert's sudden heart attack took him on a quiet Tuesday morning in their Ohio home, the world had felt impossibly empty. 43 years of marriage had ended with a phone call from the hospital while Clara was grading spelling tests at her kitchen table, red pen still in her trembling hand. The grief had been suffocating. Walking through their 4-bedroom house, she'd see Robert everywhere. His coffee mug still in the sink, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite cardigan draped over the back of his recliner. The silence was deafening in a home that had once been filled with laughter, grandchildren's visits, and the comfortable rhythm of 2 people who'd grown old together gracefully. When Marcus called 6 months after the funeral, his voice warm with concern and invitation, Clara had felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time since losing Robert. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking. Florida's beautiful year-round. The girls would love having their grandmother close by, and honestly, we could really use your help. You know how crazy our schedules are with work." Clara had pictured it perfectly. Sunday morning pancakes with Emma and Sophie, helping with homework at the kitchen table, maybe even volunteering at their school. She'd have purpose again, family surrounding her, love flowing in both directions. The house sold quickly, much faster than Clara had expected. 43 years of memories packed into boxes and shipped south, while Clara flew to Tampa with 2 suitcases and a heart full of anticipation. Marcus and Vanessa had converted their guest room into what they called Grandma's Suite, complete with family photos and a small desk where Clara could pursue her hobbies. Those first months had felt like a dream come true. Clara would wake before everyone else, starting coffee and preparing breakfast, while the Florida sunrise painted the kitchen in golden light. When Marcus stumbled downstairs in his rumpled work clothes, he'd kiss her cheek and say, "Morning, Mom, you're a lifesaver." The twins were pure joy. 7-year-old Emma inherited Clara's love of reading, curling up beside her grandmother every evening with chapter books that Clara would help her navigate. Sophie was the artist, covering Clara's refrigerator space with colorful drawings labeled "Me and Grandma" in wobbly crayon letters. "Tell us about when Daddy was little," they'd beg during their nightly routine, and Clara would share stories that made Marcus groan with embarrassment and the girls giggle with delight. She'd describe how their father once tried to give their goldfish a bath in the sink, or how he'd hidden vegetables under his mashed potatoes, thinking no one would notice. Clara threw herself into their lives completely. She learned the girls' school schedules, their friends' names, their favorite snacks, and bedtime stories. She coordinated playdates, attended soccer games, and volunteered for school events. When Vanessa worked late, Clara had dinner ready. When Marcus traveled for work, she maintained the household seamlessly. "I don't know how we managed without you," Vanessa had said one evening, looking genuinely grateful as Clara folded laundry while helping Emma with her math homework. Clara had contributed financially too, using Robert's life insurance money to help with the twins' private school tuition and the family's vacation to Disney World. She'd insisted on paying for groceries and utilities, wanting to pull her weight and show her appreciation for being included. For 18 blissful months, Clara had believed she'd found her place in the world again. She was needed, valued, essential to her family's happiness and stability. She had no idea how quickly essential could transform into inconvenient. The parent-teacher conference was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in October, just as the Florida heat was finally breaking into something resembling autumn. Clara had been looking forward to it for weeks. Emma had been struggling with her multiplication tables, and Clara had spent countless afternoons at the kitchen table using the same patient teaching methods that had worked with thousands of third graders over her 40-year career. "Let's make it a story, sweetheart," Clara would say, watching Emma's frustrated tears. 7 groups of elephants, with 8 elephants in each group. How many elephants are going to the circus? Within 2 weeks, Emma had mastered her times tables, proudly showing off her improvement to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, was a young woman in her 2nd year of teaching. Clara remembered being in her shoes once, eager and overwhelmed, grateful for any guidance from experienced educators. As they settled into the tiny plastic chairs around Emma's desk, Clara felt that familiar warmth of being back in an academic environment. "Emma's made remarkable progress in mathematics," Mrs. Patterson began, consulting her folder of notes. "Whoever's been working with her at home deserves real credit. Her confidence has completely transformed." Clara's chest swelled with pride. "Well, we've been practicing every day after school. I found that if you turn the multiplication facts into little stories—" "Actually," Vanessa interrupted smoothly, her professional smile sliding into place, "Marcus and I handle all the academic support at home. Clara just helps with, basic household things." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She felt her cheeks flush as Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly in confusion. Clara had spent hours helping Emma, celebrating every small victory, turning tears into triumph. But according to Vanessa, she was just the help. Mrs. Patterson glanced between them uncertainly. "Oh, I see. It's just that Emma talks about her grandmother's teaching methods quite often. She mentioned something about elephant stories for multiplication?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his miniature chair, his knees nearly touching his chin. "Mom used to be a teacher," he said, as if that explained everything. "But Vanessa and I prefer to handle the educational aspects ourselves now. We don't want to confuse Emma with different approaches." Clara stared at her son, searching for any trace of the little boy who used to beg her to help with his homework, who proudly introduced her to his friends as "my mom, the best teacher in the whole school." That boy had vanished, replaced by this stranger who could erase her contributions with casual indifference. "Of course," Mrs. Patterson said diplomatically, though her expression suggested she found the situation odd. "Emma's certainly thriving, regardless of the approach." The meeting continued for another 15 minutes, but Clara barely heard the discussion about reading levels and social development. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, feeling like she was disappearing in real time. Every time she started to speak, Vanessa would smoothly redirect the conversation, and Marcus would nod in agreement. Walking to the car afterward, Clara finally found her voice. "Marcus, I've been helping Emma every single day. You know that." "Mom," Marcus said, unlocking the car with a sharp beep, "maybe it's better if we let Vanessa and me handle the school stuff from now on. We don't want to step on any toes or create confusion." "Create confusion?" Clara repeated, sliding into the back seat. "I'm a certified teacher with 4 decades of experience." "We're a teacher," Vanessa corrected gently from the passenger seat. "Things are different now, Clara. Teaching methods have evolved." Clara stared out the window as they drove home, watching the familiar neighborhoods blur past. It was just one conversation, she told herself. Just nerves about being new parents navigating school conferences. But deep down, she knew something fundamental had shifted. The dismissals started small, like tiny paper cuts that barely registered until they began to accumulate into something that hurt constantly. Clara noticed it first during the weekly grocery shopping trips that had once been collaborative adventures, where she'd suggest family favorites and budget-friendly alternatives. "Oh, Clara, we've already planned the menu for this week," Vanessa would say with that practiced smile, steering the cart away from the items Clara had reached for. "We're trying to eat cleaner now, more organic, less processed food." Clara watched helplessly as Vanessa selected expensive quinoa and kale, while rejecting Clara's suggestion of the hearty beef stew that had been Marcus's favorite as a child. The erosion spread to every corner of their shared life. When Clara offered to drive the twins to their Saturday soccer games, she'd been driving safely for 45 years, Marcus would decline with barely concealed impatience. "Mom, we've got it covered. Besides, you don't know where the new sports complex is." The fact that Clara had successfully navigated to dozens of unfamiliar locations during her teaching career seemed irrelevant. Even her attempts to maintain the household were met with subtle resistance. Clara would spend her morning organizing the playroom, sorting toys by category, and creating learning stations like she'd done in her classroom. But by evening, Vanessa would have rearranged everything, explaining to the twins, "Mommy has a specific system that works best for our family." The most painful erosion happened in her relationship with Emma and Sophie. Clara began noticing how conversations would shift when she entered a room. Marcus and Vanessa would stop talking and smile too brightly, or they'd continue speaking, but use a tone that suggested Clara wouldn't understand or shouldn't be concerned with adult matters. "Daddy, why can't Grandma take us to the park like she used to?" Sophie asked one afternoon, her 7-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Grandma's tired more often now, sweetheart," Marcus replied, not looking at Clara, who was sitting right there, very much not tired. "And the playground equipment is different than when I was little. We want to make sure you're safe." Clara felt something inside her chest tighten. She'd supervised thousands of children on playgrounds, had earned certifications in child safety, had never once had an incident in 4 decades of teaching. But somehow, she was now deemed too incompetent, to watch two children slide down a slide. The twins, absorbing these subtle messages, began to change too. When Clara offered to help with homework, Emma would say hesitantly, "Maybe I should wait for Daddy. He knows the new way they teach math." When Clara suggested reading together, Sophie would respond, "Mommy says I should practice reading by myself to build independence." Clara found herself editing her own words, second-guessing every suggestion, walking on eggshells in what was supposed to be her home. She'd start to share an opinion about household matters, then stop mid-sentence when she saw Marcus and Vanessa exchange those meaningful glances, the kind of looks that said they were dealing with an elderly relative who didn't quite understand how things worked anymore. The most crushing moment came during a family dinner when Emma proudly announced she'd gotten an A on her multiplication test. Clara's heart soared until Emma continued, "Daddy helped me study every night this week. He taught me the elephant trick." Clara stared at her son across the table, watching him accept credit for the technique she'd developed and shared with Emma weeks earlier. Marcus met her eyes briefly, then looked away, his expression unreadable. That night, Clara sat in her room, wondering when she'd become a stranger in her own family, invisible even when she was standing right there. The anniversary party was Vanessa's idea, a celebration of 8 years of marriage that she'd been planning for months. Clara had offered to help with the preparations, but her suggestions were politely declined with variations of, "Thanks, but I've got everything under control." Still, she'd spent the afternoon before the party making her famous 7-layer dip and chocolate chip cookies, hoping to contribute something meaningful to the celebration. The house sparkled with elegant decorations, white and gold streamers, professional floral arrangements, and a catered spread that made Clara's homemade contributions look quaint by comparison. Guests began arriving at 6 o'clock. Vanessa's colleagues from the marketing firm, Marcus's real estate associates, and neighbors Clara had met but never really gotten to know. Clara wore her best dress, a navy blue outfit she'd bought for Emma's school graduation, and positioned herself near the kitchen where she could be helpful without getting in the way. She watched Marcus and Vanessa work the room like a practice team, accepting congratulations and sharing stories about their romantic getaway to Napa Valley that Clara had helped fund but hadn't been invited to join. "Can I help with anything?" Clara asked when she noticed Vanessa rushing between the kitchen and the living room, looking slightly frazzled despite her composed exterior. "Actually, yes," Vanessa said, barely pausing. "Could you just keep an eye on the appetizer trays? Make sure they stay filled?" Clara felt a small surge of purpose and threw herself into the task, arranging crackers and refilling serving spoons with the same attention to detail she'd once used for classroom parties. She was carrying a fresh tray of her homemade cookies to the dining room when she heard her name mentioned in a conversation by the patio door. Vanessa was standing with her sister Diane, both holding wine glasses and speaking in the low, conspiratorial tones that women use when they think they're having a private conversation. Clara froze behind the partially open sliding door, the tray growing heavy in her hands. "Honestly, Diane, it is like having another child in the house," Vanessa was saying, her voice carrying just enough to be heard over the party noise. "She hovers constantly, gives the girls sugar right before bedtime, and yesterday I came home to find she'd completely reorganized my entire pantry. I spent an hour trying to find the olive oil." Diane laughed, a sound that made Clara's stomach drop. "Sounds exhausting. Can't you just put her somewhere? I mean, she's getting to that age. Marcus won't hear of it. He's got this massive guilt complex about his dad dying and leaving her alone. But I swear, Diane, I'm losing my mind. I come home after 10 hours at work, and she's right there asking what she can do to help. I just want to collapse on the couch for 5 minutes without someone hovering over me with a cup of tea I didn't ask for." "What about those places? Assisted living? They have activities and people her own age." Vanessa sighed deeply. "I've looked into it. There's this gorgeous facility about 20 minutes away, Sunset Manor. It's expensive, but she's got that life insurance money from Robert just sitting there. Marcus thinks I'm heartless for even considering it. But honestly, what's heartless is letting an old woman think she's useful when she's really just in the way." Clara stood paralyzed, the tray trembling in her hands as the conversation continued. She heard herself described as clingy, confused, and burdensome. Every act of love and service she'd performed, the meals, the childcare, the financial contributions, were reframed as intrusions and inconveniences. The worst part was the laughter that followed, casual and dismissive, as if Clara's entire existence was just an amusing obstacle to be managed. Clara quietly set the tray on the nearest table and retreated to her room, the sounds of celebration echoing through the walls like mockery. The conversation happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Clara had risen early, as was her habit, and prepared breakfast for the family. The twins had already left for school, their backpacks loaded with the lunch snacks Clara had carefully packed the night before. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and laptop, reviewing property listings for his morning appointments. "Mom, could you sit down for a minute? Vanessa and I need to talk to you about something important." Clara's hands stilled on the dish towel she'd been using to wipe the counter. Something in Marcus's tone, too careful, too gentle, made her stomach clench with dread. She'd heard that voice before, when he'd called to tell her about Robert's heart attack, when difficult news required delicate delivery. Vanessa emerged from the hallway, carrying a manila folder thick with papers, her expression arranged in what Clara had learned to recognize as her professional compassion face, the same look she probably used in difficult client meetings. "Clara, we've been doing a lot of thinking lately," Vanessa began, settling into the chair across from her. "You've been so generous with your time and energy, but Marcus and I are worried that we're asking too much of you." Clara felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they'd finally recognized how much she contributed, how essential she'd become to their family's functioning. "I don't mind helping. I love being useful." Marcus opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. "That's just it, Mom. You shouldn't have to be useful all the time. You've spent 40 years taking care of other people. Your students, Dad, now us, and the girls. Don't you think you deserve to be taken care of for a change?" The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Clara stared at the website on Marcus's screen, Sunset Manor Assisted Living, with its carefully staged photos of smiling seniors playing bingo and tending garden beds. "You've been forgetting little things more often," Vanessa continued, consulting her folder as if she were presenting a business case. "Last week you left the stove on after making soup. Yesterday you spent 20 minutes looking for your reading glasses." "They were on my head," Clara whispered, the same defense she'd offered before. "Everyone does that." "And Sunday you got confused about what time Emma's soccer game started," Marcus added. "You had us all rushing around thinking we were late when the game wasn't for another 2 hours." Clara remembered Sunday differently. She'd asked Marcus about the game time, and he'd given her conflicting information while he was distracted by his phone. But when she tried to explain, the words felt heavy and useless in her mouth. Vanessa slid a glossy brochure across the table. "We visited this place last week, and it's absolutely beautiful. They have art classes, book clubs, people your own age who share your interests. Professional staff trained to provide the kind of care you deserve." Clara picked up the brochure with trembling fingers. The cover showed an elegant woman about her age, laughing with friends in a sunlit common room. Inside, she found floor plans for luxury apartments and descriptions of enriching activities and 24-hour peace of mind. "This is a nursing home," she said quietly. "It's assisted living," Marcus corrected. "Very different. You'd have your own apartment, your independence, but with support when you need it." "How much does it cost?" Marcus and Vanessa exchanged a glance. "It's expensive," Vanessa admitted. "But you have Robert's life insurance money. And honestly, Clara, what else are you saving it for?" Clara stared at the brochure, understanding with horrible clarity that her life savings would pay for her own exile from the family she'd tried so hard to serve. That night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, surrounded by cardboard boxes that had appeared in her room like silent sentinels of her displacement. Marcus and Vanessa had worked with ruthless efficiency while she'd spent the afternoon walking aimlessly through a nearby park, trying to process the reality that her family wanted her gone. The boxes bore cheerful labels written in Vanessa's neat handwriting: Clara's books, Clara's photos, Clara's kitchen items. Everything that remained of 62 years of life, everything that survived Robert's death and her move to Florida, now reduced to 6 containers that could fit in the back of a pickup truck. Clara lifted the lid of the box marked Photos and pulled out a frame containing her wedding picture. She and Robert stood on the steps of St. Mary's Church, her dress borrowed from her sister, his suit rented for the occasion. They'd been 22 and 24, broke but wildly in love, certain they could conquer anything together. Robert's smile was radiant, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, as if he'd never let her go. "I don't know what to do, Bobby," she whispered to the empty room, her finger tracing the glass over his face. "I gave them everything we built together. I sold our house, the one where we painted the nursery yellow, because we didn't know if Marcus would be a boy or girl. I used the money from your life insurance, the money you worked 60-hour weeks to provide, to help pay for their mortgage." The house around her hummed with the familiar sounds of evening routine. She could hear Marcus and Vanessa discussing logistics in their bedroom, scheduling the movers, coordinating the admission process, dividing up the tasks of her removal like she was a piece of furniture being relocated. Clara opened another box and found her collection of handmade cards from students over the years. Thousands of children had passed through her classroom, each one leaving behind crayon drawings and misspelled thank you notes that she'd treasured like jewels. "Dear Mrs. Morrison, you are the best techer ever," one card read, decorated with a lopsided heart. "Thank you for helping me learn to read." She'd made a difference in those children's lives. She'd been valued, respected, essential. Parents had sought her advice, principals had relied on her expertise, and new teachers had begged her to mentor them. She'd been Clara Morrison, educator, leader, someone who mattered. Now she was just Grandma Clara, too forgetful to be trusted with a stove, too confused to remember soccer schedules, too burdensome to live with her own family. Through the thin walls, she heard Emma's voice drifting from the next room. "Mommy, is Grandma really going away?" "She's going to a place where she'll be happier, sweetheart," Vanessa replied, "with people who can take better care of her. But I like taking care of Grandma. She helps me with my homework and she makes the best pancakes." "I know, baby. But Grandma needs different kinds of help now, professional help." Clara closed the photo box and pulled Robert's pillow against her chest, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that somehow still lingered after 3 years. She'd washed that pillowcase hundreds of times, but she imagined she could still smell him, still feel his presence. "They think I'm broken, Bobby. They think I'm some confused old woman who can't function anymore. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am just fooling myself, thinking I still have something to offer." The silence that followed felt like judgment, like the universe agreeing with her family's assessment that she'd outlived her usefulness and needed to be put away somewhere safe and out of sight. Clara had been packing mechanically for hours, her movements slow and deliberate, as she wrapped her most precious belongings in tissue paper. Each item felt like a small goodbye. The ceramic vase Robert had bought her for their 10th anniversary, the framed photo of Marcus's high school graduation, the silver bracelet Emma had picked out for her last birthday with her own allowance money. She was carefully placing her jewelry box into one of the smaller containers when her fingers brushed against something unexpected wedged beneath the velvet lining. An envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, that she'd completely forgotten about during the chaos of the past few months. The return address made her heart skip. Riverside Elementary School District, Mrs. Janet Henderson, Principal. Clara's hands trembled as she recognized the careful, cursive handwriting of her former boss and dear friend. The postmark was from 2 months ago. The letter had been forwarded from her old Ohio address to Marcus and Vanessa's house, where it had apparently been mixed in with her personal mail and forgotten. Inside the envelope, Clara found 2 items that would change everything. The first was a check from the school district for accumulated sick days she'd never used during her 40-year career. The amount made her gasp. nearly $15,000 that she'd completely forgotten about. But it was the handwritten note from Mrs. Henderson that truly took her breath away. "Dearest Clara," the letter began in Janet's familiar script, "I hope this finds you well and enjoying your retirement in Florida. I'm writing because we desperately need your help, though I hardly know where to begin." Clara sank onto her bed, the letter clutched in her shaking hands as she continued reading. "The new third-grade teacher, Miss Rodriguez, is struggling terribly. She's bright and eager, but she lacks the classroom management skills that made you legendary here at Riverside. Last week, she actually broke down crying during a faculty meeting, saying she felt like a failure. When I asked what might help, she said, 'I wish I could spend just one day watching Mrs. Morrison teach. The other teachers talk about her methods like they were magic.'" Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read on. "The district has approved a new consulting program for retired educators, specifically designed for teachers like you who have decades of wisdom to share. We're offering contracts for curriculum development, mentoring new teachers, and conducting professional development workshops. The pay is excellent, the schedule is completely flexible, and honestly, Clara, we need you more than you know." The letter continued with specific details about the program, the hourly rates that were higher than Clara had ever earned as a classroom teacher, and the profound impact she could have on a new generation of educators. But it was the final paragraph that made Clara's heart race with something she hadn't felt in months: hope. "I've been the principal here for 15 years, Clara, and I've never met a teacher with your combination of skill, wisdom, and heart. The way you connected with struggling students, the classroom management techniques you developed, the reading interventions you pioneered, these aren't just fond memories. They're exactly what our current teachers need to learn. You didn't just retire, dear friend. You graduated to the next level of your calling." Clara read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. She wasn't a confused old woman whose best days were behind her. She was Clara Morrison, master educator, someone whose expertise was not only valuable, but desperately needed. For the first time since arriving in Florida, Clara felt like herself again. Not someone's burden, but someone with gifts the world still needed. Clara waited until Marcus and Vanessa left for work the next morning before making the phone call that would change her life. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the familiar number for Riverside Elementary, but her voice grew stronger with each ring. "Clara Morrison!" Mrs. Henderson's voice exploded through the phone with such warmth and enthusiasm that Clara almost started crying. "I was hoping you'd call. Please tell me you got my letter and that you're considering coming back to help us." The conversation that followed was like stepping back into her own skin after months of feeling invisible. Janet painted a picture of the school district that was both familiar and evolved. New technology, updated curriculum standards, but the same fundamental challenges that Clara had spent 4 decades learning to navigate. "The teaching shortage is worse than it's ever been," Janet explained. "We're hiring people straight out of college with no classroom experience, throwing them into rooms with 30 kids and expecting miracles. Half of them quit within 2 years because nobody's teaching them the real skills: how to manage behavior, how to reach struggling learners, how to communicate with difficult parents." Clara found herself leaning forward, her educator's mind already engaged. "What about mentoring programs, peer observation, professional learning communities? We've tried all of that, but there's a difference between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. These new teachers need someone who's been in the trenches, who's developed systems that actually work. They need you, Clara." As Janet described the consulting program in detail, Clara felt a familiar excitement building in her chest. The district was offering contracts for 3 different types of work: curriculum development for reading intervention programs, one-on-one mentoring for struggling teachers, and professional development workshops for educators across the region. "The reading intervention piece would be perfect for you," Janet continued. "Remember that system you developed for kids who were 2 grade levels behind? The one with the story mapping and phonics integration? Miss Rodriguez tried to recreate it based on notes she found in your old classroom, but she's missing crucial elements. We need the master herself." Clara closed her eyes, remembering those breakthrough moments when a struggling student suddenly understood that letters made sounds, Sounds made words, and words made stories. She thought about Tommy Martinez, who'd entered her classroom unable to read his own name and left reading chapter books. She remembered Sarah Chen, whose parents had been told she had a learning disability, until Clara discovered she just needed a different approach to phonics. "Clara, are you still there?" "I'm here," Clara said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "Janet, can I ask you something honestly? Do you think I still have it? The skills, the energy, the ability to make a real difference?" Janet's laugh was incredulous. "Clara Morrison, you're asking me if the woman who revolutionized reading instruction in this district, who mentored half our current faculty, who never had a single parent complaint in 40 years, you're asking if you still have what it takes?" "I've been told recently that I'm forgetting things, that I'm not as sharp as I used to be." "By whom? Because let me tell you what I know about you. Last month, I was cleaning out old files and found your lesson plans from 15 years ago. I showed them to our curriculum specialist, and she said they were more innovative and comprehensive than anything she'd seen from current teachers. Your mind isn't declining, Clara. It's filled with 40 years of accumulated wisdom that most educators can only dream of achieving." For the first time since moving to Florida, Clara felt truly seen, truly valued for who she was, rather than dismissed for who others thought she was becoming. Clara's transformation began in the quiet hours when Marcus and Vanessa were at work and the twins were at school. While her family assumed she was passively accepting her fate, Clara was methodically rebuilding her life with the same strategic thinking that had made her an exceptional educator for 4 decades. Her first call was to a real estate agent in Ohio, a woman named Patricia, who had helped several of Clara's former colleagues find retirement housing. "I need something small but comfortable," Clara explained, her voice clear and purposeful. "Within walking distance of Riverside Elementary, if possible. I'll be working as a consultant and want to be accessible to the teachers I'm mentoring." Patricia's enthusiasm was infectious. "Oh, Mrs. Morrison, my daughter had you for 3rd grade 12 years ago. Katie Sullivan, now Katie Chen. She still talks about how you taught her to love reading. I'd be honored to help you find the perfect place." Within 2 days, Patricia had emailed photos of a charming 2-bedroom townhouse just 4 blocks from the school. The rent was reasonable, the neighborhood was safe, and best of all, it had a small 2nd bedroom that could serve as a home office for her consulting work. Clara's next step was financial logistics. She spent hours on her laptop. The same device Marcus had suggested might be too complicated for her. Researching tax implications for consulting income, health insurance options for retirees, and the cost of living differences between Florida and Ohio. She opened a new bank account online, one that only she would have access to, and began systematically transferring funds from the joint account she shared with Marcus. The consulting contract from Riverside arrived via email, and Clara reviewed every clause with the careful attention she'd once applied to IEP documents and parent conference notes. The hourly rate was generous, the schedule completely flexible, and the work description read like a love letter to everything she'd accomplished as an educator. While Marcus and Vanessa discussed her transition timeline over dinner, Clara nodded appropriately and asked practical questions about Sunset Manor's policies and procedures. They interpreted her compliance as resignation, never suspecting she was conducting reconnaissance. "What's the cancellation policy if someone changes their mind?" she asked one evening, her tone carefully neutral. "Why would someone change their mind?" Vanessa replied, looking puzzled. "I mean, once you're settled in and making friends, you'll wonder why you were ever nervous about it." Clara filed away the answer. 72 hours notice required, full deposit refundable within the first month, while nodding as if reassured. She even visited Sunset Manor with them, taking notes about room layouts, meal schedules, and activity programs. Marcus and Vanessa were delighted by her apparent cooperation, praising her positive attitude and mature acceptance of the situation. "See, Mom, I told you you'd like it once you saw the place," Marcus said as they toured the facility's library. "Look at all these books, and they have a book club that meets twice a week." Clara smiled and admired the collection, while internally noting that most of the books were romance novels and large print mysteries, Nothing like the professional development materials and educational research she preferred. But she kept her observations to herself, maintaining the facade of the compliant elderly relative who was grateful for her family's wise guidance. Her most crucial preparation was emotional. Each night, Clara sat with Robert's photo and reminded herself of who she truly was. Not someone's burden, but an accomplished professional with skills the world still needed. She wasn't sneaking around or being deceptive. She was simply reclaiming her right to make decisions about her own life. The woman who had managed classroom crises and difficult parents for 40 years was about to manage the biggest crisis of all. The first crack in Marcus and Vanessa's carefully constructed plan revealed itself on a Thursday morning, 3 days before Clara's scheduled admission to Sunset Manor. Marcus was rushing through his morning routine, coffee in one hand and phone in the other, when an unfamiliar number appeared on his screen. "Mr. Morrison? This is Linda Chen from Sunset Manor's billing department. I'm calling about your mother's admission scheduled for this Sunday." Marcus gestured for Vanessa to lower the volume on the morning news. "Yes, what about it?" "Well, we've encountered an issue with the payment authorization. The account information you provided shows insufficient funds for the initial deposit and first month's fees. Could you double-check the routing and account numbers?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. "That's impossible. My mother has plenty of money in that account." He was already pulling up the banking app on his phone, his fingers moving frantically across the screen. The balance that appeared made his blood run cold. The account that should have contained nearly $60,000 from Robert's life insurance policy now showed just over $3,000. "I'll need to call you back," Marcus said, ending the call abruptly. "What's wrong?" Vanessa asked, noting the color draining from her husband's face. "Mom's money. It's gone." Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway at that moment, moving with more purpose and energy than Marcus had seen from her in months. She was fully dressed at 7:30 in the morning, her hair styled, wearing the navy blue dress she reserved for important occasions. "Mom," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm, "we need to talk about your bank account. There seems to be some kind of problem." Clara poured herself a cup of coffee with steady hands, her movements deliberate and controlled. "What kind of problem, dear?" "The money for Sunset Manor. It's not there." Clara took a sip of her coffee and regarded her son with clear, focused eyes that held none of the confusion or uncertainty he'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Oh, that money. I moved it to a different account yesterday. For my new business venture." Vanessa's coffee cup clattered against the granite countertop. "Your what?" "I'm going back to work," Clara said, matter-of-factly, settling into her usual chair at the breakfast table. "The Riverside School District in Ohio has offered me a consulting contract. Very generous terms, actually. They need experienced educators to mentor new teachers and develop curriculum materials." Marcus stared at his mother as if she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Mom, you can't just decide to go back to work. We've made arrangements. We've signed contracts." "You've made arrangements," Clara corrected gently. "I don't recall signing anything regarding Sunset Manor. In fact, when I asked about their cancellation policy, they were quite clear that residents can change their minds with proper notice." Vanessa's professional composure cracked visibly. "Clara, this is ridiculous. You can't manage living alone anymore. You forget things. You get confused about simple tasks." "Do I?" Clara interrupted, her teacher's voice emerging with quiet authority. "Yesterday, I successfully researched real estate markets, negotiated a lease agreement, set up online banking, reviewed a complex employment contract, and coordinated my relocation logistics. Today, I'll be finalizing my moving arrangements and confirming my start date with the school district." She paused, letting her words sink in. Those don't sound like the actions of someone who's too confused to manage her own life. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This wasn't the passive, compliant mother who had been gratefully accepting their guidance. This was someone else entirely. Someone who reminded him uncomfortably of the formidable educator who had once commanded respect from students, parents, and administrators alike. We'll discuss this later, he said weakly. Clara smiled serenely. Of course, dear. I'll be in my room packing. I have a moving truck coming Saturday morning. The confrontation Clara had been quietly preparing for arrived that evening with all the subtlety of a thunderstorm. Marcus paced the living room like a caged animal, while Vanessa sat rigidly on the couch, her laptop open to various websites about elderly care and cognitive decline. Clara entered the room calmly, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the same composed expression she'd once used to handle the most challenging parent conferences. "Mom, sit down," Marcus said, his voice strained with barely controlled frustration. "We need to talk about this consulting nonsense." "There's nothing nonsensical about it," Clara replied, settling into the armchair that had become her usual spot. "I have a legitimate job offer from a reputable school district." Vanessa leaned forward, her tone taking on the patronizing sweetness Clara had learned to despise. "Clara, honey, we understand you want to feel useful, but you have to be realistic. You're 62 years old, you've been retired for 3 years, and you've been having memory issues." "What memory issues?" Clara asked, opening her folder. "Can you be specific?" Marcus stopped pacing. "You left the stove on. You forgot Emma's soccer schedule. You misplaced your glasses constantly." Clara pulled out a small notebook and flipped it open. "Let's examine those incidents objectively. The stove incident occurred on March 15th while I was making soup for Emma's cold. You, Vanessa, entered the kitchen complaining about a work crisis and took over the cooking while I was still preparing ingredients. When you left the burner on, it became my fault because I was the last one you remembered seeing in the kitchen." Vanessa's mouth opened in protest, but Clara continued. "The soccer schedule confusion happened on April 2nd. Marcus, you told me the game was at 10 o'clock while you were reading your emails. When I checked the schedule later, it showed 12 o'clock. Instead of acknowledging your mistake, you suggested I had misunderstood." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you're—" "As for my glasses," Clara interrupted, her voice gaining strength, "everyone misplaces their reading glasses. Robert did it for 30 years. You do it regularly, Marcus. But when I do it, it becomes evidence of cognitive decline." She stood up, her posture straight and commanding. "For months, you've been collecting evidence of my supposed incompetence while ignoring evidence of my continued capability. I've maintained your household, helped your children with homework, contributed financially to your family, and provided childcare whenever needed. But somehow, leaving a pair of glasses on my head negates all of that." Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "Clara, you can't just leave. We've told the girls you're going to Sunset Manor. We've made arrangements with work schedules. You can't just upend everyone's life because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." "Midlife crisis," Clara repeated, her eyebrows rising. "I'm a widow who gave up her home, her community, and her independence to help her family, only to be told she's too burdensome to live with. If anyone's having a crisis, it's not me." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, looking more like the frustrated little boy she remembered than the confident man he'd become. "Mom, please, just think about this logically. You'll be alone in Ohio. What if something happens to you?" Clara's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Marcus, I've been taking care of myself and others for 40 years. I raised you as a single parent for 2 years when your father was deployed. I managed a classroom of 30 children while dealing with difficult parents and administrator demands. I navigated your father's cancer treatment and his final months with grace and strength." She paused, letting her words settle between them. "What makes you think I suddenly lost all those capabilities the moment I turned 60? The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of assumptions that had never been questioned and the uncomfortable recognition that they might have been completely wrong. 2 weeks after Clara had settled into her charming townhouse in Ohio, Marcus received a phone call that would haunt him for months. He was showing a property to potential buyers when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, he would have let it go to voicemail, but something compelled him to answer. "Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Florida State Attorney's Office. I'm calling regarding Sunset Manor Assisted Living Facility." Marcus excused himself from his clients and stepped outside, his heart beginning to race. "Is everything okay?" Is someone hurt? Sir, we're conducting an investigation into financial fraud and elder abuse at the facility. Several families have filed complaints, and we're reaching out to anyone who had planned to place a relative there. Can you confirm that your mother, Clara Morrison, was scheduled for admission on October 15th? Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Yes, but she changed her mind. She didn't actually move in. Why? What's happened? Detective Walsh's voice was grim. Mr. Morrison, Sunset Manor has been operating with an expired state license for the past 6 months. They've been accepting new residents and collecting fees while providing substandard care. We've documented medication errors, understaffing, financial exploitation, and in some cases, outright neglect. The detective continued, detailing horrors that made Marcus's stomach turn. Residents left in soiled clothing for hours, medications administered incorrectly or not at all, family savings drained through hidden fees and unnecessary services. One elderly man had been hospitalized for severe dehydration after staff repeatedly ignored his requests for water. The facility's financial records show they've been specifically targeting seniors with life insurance payouts or significant savings, Detective Walsh explained. They would fast-track admissions for residents with the most assets, then systematically drain their accounts through additional charges and services the residents never requested or received. Marcus sank onto a nearby bench, his mind reeling. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years. The state health department had received multiple complaints, but the facility's lawyers kept appealing and delaying inspections. They finally lost their license in March, but they never informed families or stopped accepting new residents. Meanwhile, 300 miles north in Ohio, Clara was experiencing a professional renaissance that exceeded even her own optimistic expectations. The consulting work at Riverside Elementary had exploded beyond the original contract. Word of her expertise had spread throughout the regional education network, and she now had requests from 5 different school districts. Her first mentee, Miss Rodriguez, had transformed from a crying, overwhelmed rookie into a confident educator whose classroom management had become a model for other new teachers. The reading intervention program Clara had redesigned was showing remarkable results. Struggling students were advancing 2 grade levels in reading within a single semester. "Clara, I hate to overwhelm you," Mrs. Henderson said during their weekly planning meeting, "but the state education department wants to feature your intervention program in their annual best practices publication. They're also asking if you'd be interested in presenting at the statewide education conference next spring." Clara smiled, remembering how Marcus and Vanessa had worried she wouldn't be able to manage living alone. Her calendar was now booked 3 months in advance with consulting appointments, workshop presentations, and mentoring sessions. The phone rang constantly with requests for her expertise. The woman they had tried to warehouse as a confused burden was not only thriving independently, but had become one of the most sought-after educational consultants in the region. Her quiet defiance had saved her from a nightmare and returned her to a life of purpose, respect, and genuine contribution. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and proving everyone wrong. 6 months into Clara's new life in Ohio, Marcus's world had completely unraveled. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday evening while Clara was grading assessment materials for her latest consulting project. She almost didn't answer, recognizing Marcus's number, but something in the persistent ringing suggested urgency rather than manipulation. "Mom?" His voice was barely recognizable, strained, exhausted, and stripped of the confident authority he'd wielded during their last confrontation. I need to talk to you." Clara set down her red pen and gave him her full attention. "What's wrong, Marcus?" "Everything." The word came out as a broken whisper. "Vanessa filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. She said I'm incapable of handling family responsibilities without someone else doing all the work. She's asking for primary custody of the girls, and honestly, Mom, I don't know how to argue with her." Clara felt a familiar pang of maternal concern, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "She was right about one thing. I have no idea how to manage everything. The house is a disaster, The girls are struggling with the separation, Emma's grades are slipping, and Sophie cries every night asking for you. I've been hiring babysitters and housekeepers, but it's not the same. Nothing works the way it did when you were here." Marcus paused, and Clara could hear him struggling to compose himself. "I tried to do Emma's math homework with her last night. She looked at me and said, 'Daddy, you're not doing it right. Grandma Clara taught me the elephant way, and it makes sense.' I realized I don't even know how to help my own daughter with third-grade multiplication." Clara's heart ached, but she kept her voice steady. "Marcus, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you could come back. Help me figure this out. I know I messed up. We messed up. Terribly. But I'm drowning here, and the girls need stability. They need you." The silence stretched between them, filled with months of hurt and the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. Clara walked to her window, looking out at the small garden she'd planted behind her townhouse, where tomatoes and herbs were thriving under her careful attention. "Marcus," she said finally, "6 months ago, you told me I was too confused and forgetful to live independently. You wanted to place me in a facility where I'd be managed by strangers because you believed I couldn't take care of myself. Now you're telling me you can't function without my help." "I know how that sounds," Marcus said desperately. "But I was wrong. We were so wrong about everything. You're not confused or incapable. You're the strongest, most competent person I know. I should have seen that. I should have valued what you were doing for our family instead of treating you like a burden." Clara closed her eyes, remembering Emma's proud smile when she mastered her multiplication tables, Sophie's delight in their afternoon art projects, the satisfaction of creating order and warmth in their household. She missed the girls terribly. Their phone calls and video chats were highlights of her week. "Marcus, I love you, and I love Emma and Sophie more than words can express. But I won't come back to be your solution. You're their father. You need to learn to parent them, not delegate that responsibility to someone else." Marcus's voice broke. "But I don't know how. I don't know how to braid Sophie's hair, or help with homework, or make them feel safe when they're scared about the divorce." "Then learn," Clara said gently but firmly. "Ask the girls to teach you. Watch YouTube videos. Call other parents for advice. These are skills you can develop, but you have to do the work yourself." She paused, her voice softening with love despite her resolve. "However, Emma and Sophie are always welcome to visit me here. They can spend weekends, school breaks, or summer weeks with their grandmother who adores them. But Marcus, I'm not coming back to be your substitute parent or household manager." 1 year later, Clara stood at the front of her new third-grade classroom at Riverside Elementary, watching 22 eager faces look up at her with the mixture of curiosity and excitement she had missed more than she'd realized. The consulting work had been rewarding, but when Mrs. Henderson offered her the opportunity to return to full-time teaching with a reduced schedule and the freedom to implement her innovative methods, Clara couldn't resist. "Mrs. Morrison," a small voice piped up from the second row, "my sister Katie says you're the best teacher in the whole world. She had you 12 years ago and still talks about the elephant math." Clara smiled, remembering Katie Chen, now Katie Sullivan, whose mother Patricia had helped her find this perfect townhouse. Full circle, she thought, the way life has of weaving connections across time and space. On her desk sat a framed photo from Emma and Sophie's most recent visit during spring break. The twins, now 8, flanked their grandmother in her small garden, their faces dirt-smudged and glowing with pride as they held up the vegetables they'd helped plant. Behind them, barely visible in the photo, but precious to Clara, were the raised garden beds Marcus had built during that same visit. The reconciliation with her son had been gradual and authentic. Marcus had indeed learned to braid Sophie's hair, after watching 17 YouTube tutorials and enduring several tears of frustration from both father and daughter. He'd discovered he had a talent for creative bedtime stories, and he'd even mastered Clara's elephant method for multiplication, which he now used to help other parents in Emma's class. "Mom," he'd said during their last phone call, "I finally understand what Dad meant when he said you were the strongest person he'd ever met. It wasn't about physical strength or never needing help. It was about knowing who you are and never letting anyone else define your worth. Clara's new life had expanded far beyond what she'd imagined possible during those dark months in Florida. She served on the state education committee for reading intervention programs, had published 2 articles in national teaching journals, and had been invited to present her classroom management techniques at education conferences across the Midwest. Her small townhouse had become an unofficial meeting place for young teachers seeking mentorship and veteran educators sharing innovative strategies. But perhaps the most profound change was internal. Clara had learned to distinguish between being helpful and being essential, between serving others and losing herself in their needs. She volunteered at the local literacy center, helped elderly neighbors with technology challenges, and maintained strong relationships with dozens of former students who still sought her advice. But she did these things from a place of choice and strength, not from a desperate need to prove her worth. As her students began their morning writing assignment, Clara sat at her desk and opened the small journal she'd started keeping after her move back to Ohio. Today's entry was simple. Taught fractions using pizza analogies, Michael, who has been struggling with math anxiety, suddenly understood and asked to solve problems at the board, reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. Through her classroom window, she could see the apartment complex where she lived independently, the consulting office where she worked with new teachers twice a week, and the community center where she led a book club for seniors every Tuesday evening. Each building represented a choice she had made for herself, a life constructed on her own terms. The woman who had been dismissed as a confused burden had not only reclaimed her power, but had used it to touch hundreds more lives, proving that sometimes the most important lesson is remembering who you are when everyone else has forgotten.